everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys my end of July wrap up. I read a total of 30 books this past month. That's a little less than I've been reading per month recently, but that's because work actually got pretty crazy in July as I was music directing a musical for a couple of weeks. So I was very busy doing that, but it was a fun time. If you're curious, I was music directing Seussical Jr. For a group of about 30 kids. So it all turned out great, but yes, I was pretty busy with all of that. So I have 14 books to discuss in today's video. If you want to hear me talk about the other 17 books or so that I read in the earlier half of the month, I will definitely link my mid-month wrap up in the cards above. And with that being said, let's just jump right into this wrap up. So the first book that I have to discuss with you guys is Twice Shy by Sarah Hogle. I was really excited about this book going in because I read her debut novel, which was You Deserve Each Other. I absolutely loved that book. That is a book that is not for everyone, but I personally really loved it. So I was really looking forward to this one. And this is quite a bit different from that book for sure. So this one is about Maybelle and Wesley. Maybelle is a very quirky, kind of whimsical person, and she inherits this house from her great aunt, and when she shows up to move into the house, it turns out that this guy Wesley also inherited the property, and so they have to learn to get along and help each other with renovating the property and all of those things. And so it's definitely a Grump Sunshine trope going on. I also want to mention that Wesley is a virgin hero, which is not a trope that you see very often, but when it does come up, I get really excited about that because I personally love that trope. So this was just a really freaking adorable, cute romance. I put in my Goodreads review that it was so sweet that you might get a cavity from it. I also want to mention that this is a pretty low angst romance once the two characters get together, and it's also pretty low heat, low steam. So if you are someone that doesn't like a lot of sex scenes or anything like that in your romances, I think that you would really enjoy this. I've realized now from reading 2 books by this author that she typically doesn't put a lot of steam in her romances. Something else that I want to discuss a little bit about this book is that a solid chunk of this book is Maybelle's daydreams, and they are quite vivid. And to be honest, I couldn't decide whether they were adorable or whether they were bizarre. I think Jess also mentioned this when she reviewed this book in a recent reading vlog, that it's just something that can be a bit jarring when you're reading this book, that all of a sudden she goes into this daydream and these daydreams kind of go on for quite a few pages, and then all of a sudden we are slapped back into reality. So I did want to mention that. It wasn't anything terrible or anything, but it's just something that I would be aware of going into it. So yes, gave this 4 stars, definitely enjoyed it. Next up we have Briarly by Aster Glenn Gray. I don't know why that name is so difficult for me to say, but this is a novella. It is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, as you can probably tell by the cover. It is a male-male reimagining of Beauty and the Beast set in World War II. And this one was really interesting because it definitely brought its own flair to the Beauty and the Beast story that we all know, but it was also told in a very fairy tale-like format, and I think you'll get a sense of what I mean if you actually read it for yourself. I really don't have many thoughts on this one. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was really solid. I also want to mention that this is a very low heat romance. I think the 2 main characters kissed like twice, and that was it. So if you're someone that doesn't like a ton of heat in your romances, I think that you would really enjoy this one. Definitely recommend it. I think it's a really great novella. Next up we have The Lord I Left by Scarlett Peckham. This is the 3rd and final book in her Secrets of Charlotte Street series. And unfortunately, this was my least favorite of the series. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I think I gave all the books in this series 3.5 stars, but this one in particular felt kind of bland to me. But I'll just tell you a little bit about the synopsis. We have our 2 main characters, Henry, who is a member of the clergy. I'm not actually sure what he was. I know he wasn't a vicar, but yeah, he's a member of the clergy. And then we have Alice, who is the apprentice to the mistress or the madam of the Charlotte Street house that this whole series centers around. This is known as like a whipping house or a BDSM type secret club, and so Alice has been apprenticing with the woman who runs the place. And so yeah, definitely opposites here for sure. We also are featuring a virgin hero with Henry, which again, I love that trope. And I did enjoy, there were a lot of discussions about religion and how it relates to sex and sex workers. I thought that that was really interesting, but at the end of the day, I personally felt that both the main characters were kind of bland, and I didn't really find myself all that emotionally invested in either of them, and so I couldn't really get invested in their romance, so it was just fine. I definitely wanted a lot more from this series because they are darker historicals that incorporate BDSM and role-playing and things like that, but for me, they were just okay. Next up, we have The Scandal of It All by Sophie Jordan. This is book 2 in her Rogue Files series, which is a series that I have been really enjoying lately. And so the setup of this one is so fun. We have Graciela, who is now a widow, and I think she's about 36 years old. And this is a romance between her and Colin, who is her stepson's best friend. Now, she was very young when she married her stepson's father. So she's only like 6 years older than Colin and her stepson. So it's not that big of an age gap. But of course, in this time period, I think this is the Regency era, you know, a widow getting together with her stepson's best friend would be a pretty scandalous thing for sure. The setup of this one is quite fun though, because they have known each other for quite a few years, of course, but they both end up going to this sex or pleasure club one night, and Graciela is wearing a mask. I can't remember if Colin is, but most of the people that go to this club wear masks. And so it's just really fun because the two of them kind of start hooking up, and then Colin realizes who she is, and they're both mortified, but they can't deny the connection that they have with each other. So yeah, this one started out really fun. It does feature a pretty demanding and possessive hero, but I personally really enjoy that in my romances. I will say this novel turns quite serious, especially towards the end, because Graciela, she suffered miscarriages in the past. This is kind of a spoiler, but I personally would want to know this before going into this kind of book. She does end up becoming pregnant from Colin, and the pregnancy and the birth ends up being pretty problematic and traumatic. But of course there's a happily ever after at the end and all of that, but yeah, it's just, it does get very serious. So I did want to bring that up, but I definitely recommend this, gave it 4 stars, a very solid read from Sophie Jordan. Next up, I read Barbarian's Touch by Ruby Dixon. This is book 8 in the Ice Planet Barbarian series, which if you don't know, this series has been going viral lately on TikTok, and this is quite the long series too. I believe there's 22 books, so I still have quite a few books to get to before getting through the entire series. But this installment was quite a bit longer than the previous ones. I believe this one was about like 300 pages, whereas the previous installments were maybe like 250 pages at the most. But I thought it actually worked really well for the story of this hero and heroine. The heroine is actually deaf, and I thought that the representation was really well done and really interesting. And yeah, these books are always a fun time. I say this all the time, they are like candy to me. I always know going in that I'm going to enjoy them and I'm going to give them 4 stars, and that is definitely the case with this one. Next book I want to talk about is The Pool Girl by Cassie Mint. This is a novella that I randomly came across from Riley Marie on her Instagram stories. I saw that she had this checked out from Kindle Unlimited, and you guys should know by now I am constantly looking for more Kindle Unlimited book recommendations, especially novellas, because I can check those out really quickly, read them really quickly, and then return them and just keep checking out books. It's a very vicious cycle for sure, but the premise of this one definitely drew me in from the get-go. The synopsis reminds me a lot of a Jessica Cain novella, and the writing does as well, so it almost makes me wonder if this is Jessica Cain just writing under another pen name. But we have a heroine. She's about 18 years old. She's very young, sunshiny, a virgin heroine as well. She is obsessed with the water. She actually works as a mermaid at the local aquarium, and so at her apartment building she's constantly lounging by the pool, and the pool happens to be right outside of the office of this man who is known as the caretaker. So this caretaker's job is like it sounds like, he takes care of the apartment building himself. And he is quite a bit older than the heroine. He's also rough looking. He looks pretty intimidating. He also walks with a limp due to a past surgery from when he was in the military, I believe. So definitely an opposites attract romance. And it's also your typical like sunshiny heroine and your kind of grumpy but obsessive and possessive hero. And these two people have just been kind of watching each other for a very long time. And finally, I think the heroine is the one to finally have a conversation with him, and he definitely feels unworthy of her, which again is another pretty typical thing from like Jessica Cain novellas. And yeah, this was a good time. I gave it 4 stars. Very steamy. It's only about 50 pages, so it'll be a really quick read for you. Next up, I am so excited to talk about this book. It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Hands down, my favorite Tessa Bailey book that I have read so far. I've read about 4 of her books at this point, and this one is just absolutely amazing. It is inspired by Schitt's Creek, so if you know and love that show, I think that you would really enjoy this romance for sure. We have our main character Piper. She is definitely very reminiscent of Alexis Rose from Schitt's Creek, and I loved the idea that Tessa Bailey had that she wanted to give Alexis Rose her true happily ever after, and so that was the catalyst for writing this romance. And so we have Piper. She lives in LA. She's very much like an influencer. She's a party girl, and she does something pretty terrible at the beginning of the novel. So her stepfather sends Piper and her sister to this little town called Westport. It's this little fishing village in the Pacific Northwest. So Piper is definitely out of her element. She quickly meets this man, Brendan, who is a very grumpy fisherman. And yeah, things go on from there. We've got the grump sunshine trope going on. We've got the opposites attract trope as well. I also love the idea of like the fish out of water kind of trope. You know, we've got someone like Piper being put into an environment that is so not what she's used to. And I also loved seeing her create relationships with the people of the town, because basically the connection with Westport is that this is where her biological father is from, but he passed away when they were like 2 years old or something like that. So she has no memories of him, but the people in the town do. And this was just fantastic. Very typical of Tessa Bailey. Very, 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 very steamy for sure. I was so here for that. Like I said, I loved seeing Piper lay down some real roots in Westport, but I also loved seeing her learn to accept and love herself, and seeing her fall in love with Brendan, this man who is seemingly very different from her. It was absolutely fantastic. This may be one of the top 10 romances I've read so far this year. Oh, you knew a Jessica Cain novella was going to show up in this wrap up, right? So we have Pound of Flesh by Jessica Cain. This is a novella that wasn't really on my radar, to be honest. This is one of her older releases. I believe she wrote this in like 2018. Also, I kind of despise the cover and the font. It just looks terrible compared to her newer covers. The only reason why I read this one was because I saw Lacey from Lacey Book Lovers give this one 5 stars, and I think she's only given like 2 Jessica Cain novellas 5 stars. So I thought that was really saying something for this novella. I assumed I was going to love it, and I really didn't. I gave it 3 stars. Unfortunately, this is one of my least favorites from her. I think the main issue is that this was even a little over the top for me, which is really saying something as someone that like adores most of what Jessica Cain writes. Yeah, like the hero is described as being like over 7 feet tall. He's this huge hulking man, and the heroine is this tiny little thing. Also throughout the novella, the hero breaks several tables and chairs and windows just by like touching them. It's very over the top for sure. I'm gonna give you a very brief synopsis of this, but basically the heroine's brother owes the hero a lot of money. He doesn't have the money, and so the hero decides to take the heroine as his payback. Like I've already stated, this novella is very over the top. I also didn't love that the hero first fell in love with the heroine when she was only 15, and then he went to prison, and now that he's out of prison and she's 18, he can actually be with her. But like, yeah, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So This was not my favorite. I gave it 3 stars. Next up, we have How to Fail at Flirting by Denise Williams. I don't know why that is such a difficult title for me to say, but I was really excited about going into this book because I know that Jess from Peace Love Books raved about this one, and I don't know, the cover didn't really appeal to me, but because so many people were raving about it, I decided to give it a chance, and I am glad that I did. I do want to say content warnings though for emotional and physical abuse, sexual assault, revenge porn, and cheating, okay? So I'm gonna get into all of that in a minute, but I did want to say, like, the cover's deceiving. This book gets very serious at some points. We have our main characters, Naya and Jake. They meet at a bar one night, kind of have a one-night stand situation, and Naya comes to find out that Jake is working for a consulting company that is working for the university that she teaches at, so there's a little bit of a forbidden thing going on with the two of them having a relationship. Also, about 3 years prior to the beginning of this novel, Naya was in a very abusive relationship, which is why I brought up those content warnings. So she's still dealing with the trauma of that and trying to get over that so that she can be in a healthy relationship with someone like Jake. I ended up really enjoying this one. I gave it 4 stars. I thought the writing was really great, and I'm looking forward to reading more from Denise Williams. However, there is something going on in this novel that I really didn't like, and I feel like nobody else talks about it when talking about this book, but Jake, our hero, is married the entire time that this book happens. Naya finds out through, like, hearing a conversation through the door with Jake and his wife that they are married, but they've been separated for well over a year, basically because his wife cheated on him, but there's reasons why they can't actually get divorced. So they are separated, but they are still technically married. And Naya and Jake both recognize that this is not good, that he's a married man and they are in a relationship together. But I still feel like both the author and the characters just kind of let this whole situation slide a bit too much, and it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So just know that, like, there's technically cheating in this book. He is still married. Like, yeah. So that kind of kept me from really investing myself into Jake, because Jake is a very sweet man. He's definitely a cinnamon roll hero, but at the end of the day, he's married. And I read, like, the epilogue a couple of times, and there seems to be no closure in terms of his marriage. I don't think he ever actually got divorced by the end. So I'm confused, unless I missed something. I don't know. Next up, we have The Pitcher's Assistant by Jessa Kane. Oh my god, I'm so glad that I read this novella, because after reading Pound of Flesh, reading that novella actually made me really sad that I had found a novella that I didn't like from Jessa Kane. So that's why I quickly wanted to try to read something else from her that I thought that I was going to really enjoy, and I really loved this one. This is one of her shorter novellas for sure. I think it's just about like 55 to 60-ish pages. And the premise is just everything, because we have a baseball player hero. I was really excited to see Jessa Kane write an athlete hero, and I thought that she did a really great job with that. So we have our heroine. She is working as an intern for this reporter, this sports reporter. I end up going into the locker room to try to interview some of the players for, I think it's the Houston Astros that this book is centered around. And there's this guy, Court Malloy, who is the pitcher for the team, and he's quite a bit older than her. I believe she's just about 18 or so, and he's like 32 or something like that. So there's definitely an age gap going on, which is very typical for Jessa Kane. Basically, the second he sees her, he falls in love. Again, very typical for Jessa Kane. I personally love the way that she writes kind of like the meet cutes between the two main characters, and just like the immediate chemistry and sexual tension between them. It's so, so good. So like I said, he immediately falls in love with her and offers her a job as his assistant, but also offers her a very exclusive interview with him, which is a huge deal because Court is somebody who like never gives interviews. He ends up going back to his place with him, and things quickly heat up between the two of them. Like with a lot of Jessa Kane novellas, there's a lot of daddy kink going on. I personally live for that, but I know that that doesn't work for everybody, so just know that going into it. I personally loved every second of this. There were also some really sweet moments as well, so I highly recommend this one. Next up, we have Flowers from the Storm by Laura Kinsale. I read this because this was the July pick for the Historical Hellions book club. I'm going to link all of their information down in the description below because the live show for this book actually hasn't happened yet. We had to reschedule it. So the live show is happening this coming Saturday, August 7th at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time on Jess's channel from Peace Love Books. And yeah, so I'm gonna put all of that information down in the description below. Definitely come join us for that live show discussion because I definitely don't want to talk too much about this book because that live show is happening. But this is a historical romance, of course. It's more of an old school romance. I believe this might have been written in like the 90s or something like that. I can't quite remember. But the plot of this one is quite a bit different. We have our main character who's a duke, and he is definitely a rake in every sense of the word at the beginning of the novel, but he suffers a very major stroke. And during this time, I think this is the Regency era, they definitely treated people like this very differently than they do today. So they just put him in a private asylum, and that's kind of how the plot of this book starts. Our heroine is Maddie, who is a Quaker, and she is the cousin of the man who runs this asylum. And so that's essentially how Maddie and Christian, our hero, meet. And I ended up giving this 3 stars. There were some things that I did really enjoy about this book. I would say the first 30%-ish was my favorite part of the book because we were in the asylum seeing how these patients were treated and seeing how Maddie could actually help Christian recover from his stroke. But then once the two of them left the asylum, I personally found myself being less and less invested in the story. This book is also well over 500 pages, so know that going in. It's a very long historical romance, so I expected a really awesome slow burn romance between these two. While it is slow burn, I personally didn't love the way that this was executed. So that's gonna be all of my thoughts for this wrap up. Definitely check that live show out if you wanna hear more of my in-depth thoughts as well as Samantha's, Jess's, and Desiree's. I'm really excited for that live show later this week. Next up, I read The Witch's Wolves by Ellie Mae McGregor. I was so excited going into this. First of all, I love this cover, and the premise is basically Little Red Riding Hood reimagined, but Little Red is queer and she has a romance with 2 wolf men. So it's an MMF paranormal romance novella, and it was just as good as I hoped it would be. I gave it 4 stars. There were some really sweet and wholesome moments, but it's also an erotic romance novella, so very steamy as well. I recommend it. I had a fun time. Next book I have to discuss is The Night Tiger by Yang Jae Chu. This is a very interesting premise for sure, but basically we have our 2 very major characters. The first one is Ji Lin. This takes place in 1930s Malaysia, by the way. She is a dressmaker's apprentice, but she also moonlights as a dance hall girl. And then we have our other main character, Ren, who is a young Chinese boy. He works as a servant for this doctor, and these 2 characters end up getting connected by this severed finger. I think I want to just end the synopsis at that because this is part historical fiction, but it's also part mystery and murder mystery, so I don't want to go like too in depth in the plot or anything like that, but I ended up giving this 4 stars. I'm really glad that I finally read it. This book had just been sitting on my shelves for like 2 years because this is a book of the month book from January of 2019. So yeah, I'm glad that I finally gave it a chance. This is definitely a slower paced book, but I think that that worked really well for this story. I also really enjoyed Yang Jae Chu's writing style and how she built this setting of, like I said, 1930s Malaysia, but she also worked in supernatural elements, and I thought that it was just really cool. Also a really unique story, so I definitely recommend it. And last but certainly not least, we have With Visions of Red, book 3 by Trisha Wolfe. So this is a novella series of 6 novellas. This first part, the first 3 novellas, are about Sadie and Colton. So Sadie is a behavioral analyst for a police department. She goes into murder scenes and tries to get in the head of the killer to try to figure out who the killer is, basically. And then we have Colton, who is the co-owner of this BDSM sex club. Colton in particular is into the art form of shibari, which is the art of rope tying, essentially. And so the 2 of them quickly start falling for each other, but in the meantime, there is this serial killer on the loose who is killing women in a very sadistic and gruesome way. So Sadie is trying to figure out who this killer is before he strikes next. And so that is essentially the plot of these 3 novellas. So this installment in particular was like 95% about the serial killer and maybe 5% about the romance between Sadie and Colton. What I do really enjoy about this series so far is Colton, our hero, because he just worships the ground that Sadie walks on. I love him so much. I wish that the romance would have been featured more in these 3 novellas because I wanted to see more of their romance, and we just don't get a ton of that because we are focusing so much on this serial killer and on the murder mystery. So once again, I thought this was solid. I thought the wrap up of the serial killer plotline was interesting. It wasn't anything that really blew me away. So I gave this one 4 stars, just like I gave the other 2 books in this series so far. I'm looking forward to reading the other 3 novellas in this series because I think those 3 are centering around Quinn and Avery, who are 2 characters that have been featured a lot in the series so far, but they haven't gotten their own story yet. All right, guys, that's going to be it for my end of July reading wrap up. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Definitely leave a comment down below if you want to tell me about some of your favorite reads from July. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!